Right, so good morning everybody, or afternoon, by the time you're watching this. So last lesson we looked at the beginning of homeostasis, chapter 5. So chapter 5, we're starting off with homeostasis, control of internal conditions. And hopefully you picked up from that work that there are two parts to maintaining internal conditions. There is the hormonal system and the nervous system. Now the hormonal system it's very complicated, and we'll be moving on to that a lot later. The nervous system, okay, is what we are going to focus on today. So today is a general introduction to the nervous system. So basically, we're going to start off by looking at some different types of receptors. Now, we spoke about this last time. So a receptor is any cell in the body that detects a change or a stimulus that's either inside the body or outside the body. Now, because the nervous system transmits messages around the body via electrical impulses, another name for a receptor is an energy transducer. It converts energy from one form to another. So all messages travel around the body as electrical impulses. So our energy transducers, our receptor cells, they need to transfer that energy from the way it comes in into electrical impulses. They all change it into electrical energy, but it's the way they receive it that is different. So let's have a look at some examples. So you need to write this table down, or you can print it. Can't remember that. Anyway, maybe. Okay, and then we're going to fill this in. So we've got the ear. So in your cochlea, in your ear, so it looks a bit like a snail shell, if you remember that from lower down the school. There are cells that are very responsive to the vibrations from sound energy. So the energy comes in as sound energy. There are hairs in the cochlea that vibrate based on the vibrations of the sound. That then gets converted into an electrical impulse and taken to the brain. Also located in your ear are your semicircular canals. Now, your semicircular canals are to do with balance. So they ensure that you're upright, you don't fall over, and they respond to kinetic energy. So the movement or kinetic energy around you. In the eye, I've left this one blank because you should know this. Alright, but it is cones and rods. Cones detect colour, rods detect light intensity, so it's light energy. Your skin detects lots of things. It detects pressure, it detects pain, it detects heat. We've got a couple here. The Pacinian corpuscle, that detects kinetic energy or movement, essentially, of your skin, so that enables you to detect pressure. Thermoreceptors, hopefully the name gives it away, they detect heat, energy. Up your nose, you've got your olfactory cells. They detect chemicals for smell, and your tongue has got your taste buds on it, which detect, again, chemical energy. And it's believed there are now 5 different tastes that we taste: sweet, sour, salt, bitter, and umami, for those people that want to know that. Okay, so these are our receptors. They detect our stimuli. So anything, there's a change in the environment around you, they detect it, and they convert that energy in which they receive it into a electrical impulse. So the electrical impulse, they then have to travel to the coordinator in the body, which is your brain and your spinal cord. So you have two parts to your nervous system: your central nervous system, or CNS, and that is your brain and your spinal cord. Now your spinal cord is essentially just an extension of your brain. So it is capable of doing lots of things that your brain is, things that you don't think about. So it's very capable of controlling things like your response to a stimuli. It doesn't do the higher order thinking skills like your brain does, but it is very good at sort of controlling and coordinating other responses. Then we have our peripheral nervous system. So these are all of our peripheral nerves here. All right, and what they do is they take some of the electrical impulses in to the central nervous system, and they also take them out at, when you've decided what you're going to do. Okay, so these are nerves. These are nerves. They leave the spinal cord at the top, at the bottom, and all the way down. one single nerve is made up of lots and lots of neurones, which are individual cells collected together. So it's a bit like a piece of string is made of lots and lots of different fibres. Or if you're looking at an electrical wire, a piece, a copper wire in your plug, for example, is made of lots and lots of tiny little bits of copper. So those are the individual neurons or the cells, and then the nerve is like all of those bundled together. And there are 3 different types of neurone. And again, if you can print out the sheet, or if you can't print the sheet out, you might want to draw the pictures for these. So the first ones we've got are what we refer to as the sensory neurons. Now, sensory neurons are involved in your senses. So down here at this end of the sensory neurone, there will be your receptors. So these things here, these are called dendrites. They're lots and lots of tiny branches, and it means that this cell can connect to lots and lots of different receptors. This could be a cones and rods in the eyes, it could be cells in the cochlea in your ear, whatever. Okay, that receives the message and then it transmits the message all the way along this very long bit here called the axon to this end here. This will be inside the central nervous system. So this will go essentially to the closest part of your central nervous system. It could be your brain, it could be your spinal cord, whichever bit happens to be closest. We have a very long, very thin axon, and the electrical impulse travels all the way along here. Now, if you think about wires, if you had lots of wires all laid out even, and lots of electrical messages are passing along, there would be lots and lots of short circuits. Electrical impulse would jump from wire to wire, and that could happen within the nerve. So to stop that happening, we have an insulated, what we call a myelin sheath. All right, so these are individual cells, these are things called Schwann cells. They're very fatty, and what they do is they insulate it. So they're like the plastic insulation on the outside of your electrical wire, and it just means that the electrical impulse can pass all the way along here without any trouble, and will not jump from neurone to neurone. Okay, so this end is our receptor, this end is in our central nervous system. So you stand on a drawing pin, electrical impulse gets sent along all the way up central nervous system. Okay, where they will encounter what we call the relay neurons. So these are the relay neurons. So relay neurons are all inside your central nervous system, so your brain and your spinal cord. They synapse or connect to, we'll come back to that a little bit later, lots and lots of sensory neurons that come in. They are responsible for then deciding which impulses to send out along motor neurons and basically coordinate and send all these messages around the body. Now, they are unmyelinated. They're also quite small because they are just located in your central nervous system, so they don't need to be myelinated. And then they coordinate the response. So in comes a message. Oh, she stood on a drawing pin. Out goes the message. We need to lift the leg up. And that message, that electrical impulse, travels along a motor neurone. So the motor neurone, slightly different shape. So you can see here, this is what we call the cell body. This is the nucleus. It's at one end. Whereas if you go back to the sensory neurone, you can see it's sort of stuck up about halfway along. So that's how we can tell the difference. So they take electrical impulses, nervous impulses from the central nervous system, where this is located, all the way down to the effector. Now, we did look at effectors last lesson. Effectors are muscles or glands that carry out the response. They are myelinated. All right, so again, because they're outside the central nervous system, they're very long, they're very thin, and they take messages down to effectors. So in terms of a nervous response, we start off with the receptor. The receptor takes the stimulus, sends the impulse along the sensory neuron to the relay neuron to the motor neuron to the effector, and the effector carries out a response. And I will talk a little bit more about that later. Okay, so the mode of action of a nervous impulse, as I've just said, this is basically what goes on. We have the receptors, they detect the stimuli, the coordinator, they coordinate the response, that is usually the brain and spinal cord, and then we have the effector, the organ that carries out the response, which is usually a muscle or a gland. Now, a gland is an organ that secretes or releases a chemical into either the blood or into where it's needed. So we have this path, which I just spoke about: stimulus, receptor, sensory neuron, coordinator, motor neuron, effector, response. All right, and in the coordinator, that is where the relay neurons are situated. So an example of this, if I said pick up a pen, the stimulus would be me speaking. The receptor would be your ears. That message would go along the sensory neuron to the brain. The brain would then send a message or an impulse along a motor neuron in your arm to the effector, all right, which would be the muscles in your fingers, which would enable you to pick up the pen. And everything that you do follows this pathway. Now, sometimes you have to put a bit more thought into this pathway than others. If I said, speak to me in French, okay, lots of you would have to have a little bit of a think about that. And so the effector, which would be the muscles in your mouth, would take a little bit longer to respond. All right. If I said stand up, you probably wouldn't think about it for very long at all. Sometimes you can carry out these responses without any sort of conscious thought at all. And that is called a reflex action. And we'll be looking at these next lesson. Okay. So this is totally, they both carry the same path, but sometimes you have to put a little bit more thought into them than others. Okay. Right, the synapse. Now, in the central nervous system, where the sensory neurons come in and meet with the relay neurons, and where the relay neurons connect to the motor neurons, we have tiny little gaps called synapses. And a synapse looks a little bit like this. Okay, so this could be your sensory neuron, and this could be your relay neuron, or this could be your relay neuron, and this could be your motor neuron. They're exactly the same. And what happens is when the electrical impulse, the nervous impulse arrives here, what happens is it causes little vesicles of neurotransmitter to be released, and they then diffuse across this gap and bind to receptors on the other side, and then they set off an electrical impulse on the other side. Now, what is the point of that, you say? Well, the point is that basically it means that one sensory neuron or one motor neuron can form lots and lots of different synapses with lots of different neurons. And it means it can send out lots of messages to all sorts of places in the central nervous system. If everything was just sort of hardwired in, so everything had a pre-planned response, you couldn't adapt if something was different. So I'll give you an example of how this works. You are going to the oven's on, the oven is hot, and you just use a tea towel. And you take out of that your mum's best casserole dish that she was given as a wedding present. Your response should be to drop it and allow it to smash into smithereens. But part of your brain is going, oh my God, my mum will kill me if I drop this. And you'll put it on the floor or try to put it on the bench, probably, burn your hands at the same time. So having all these different synapses means you can adapt to different situations. You don't always have to do the same sort of pre-programmed response. There are some responses that are pre-programmed, and again, I'll talk about those next lesson, but having these synapses does allow us to adapt. So it also means that electrical impulse can only go in one direction. Theoretically, electrical impulses can go along and back. But when they get to a synapse, if they release this chemical, this what we call a neurotransmitter, then it will pass across here, and then it can cause electrical impulse here, and it won't go back in the other direction. Okay, so I'm just going to watch a video which gives a bit more detail.
Welcome to 2-Minute Neuroscience, where I simplistically explain neuroscience topics in 2 minutes or less. In this installment, I will discuss synaptic transmission. Most communication between neurons occurs at a specialized structure called a synapse. A synapse is an area where two neurons come close enough to one another that they are able to pass chemical signals from one cell to another. The neurons are not actually connected, but are separated by a microscopically small space called the synaptic cleft. The cleft is less than 40 nanometers wide. By comparison, a human hair is about 75,000 nanometers wide. The neuron where the signal is initiated is called the presynaptic neuron, while the neuron that receives the signal is called the postsynaptic neuron. In the presynaptic neuron, there are chemical signals called neurotransmitters that are packaged into small sacs called vesicles. Each vesicle can contain thousands of neurotransmitter molecules. When the presynaptic neuron is excited by an electrical signal called an action potential, This causes the vesicles to fuse with the presynaptic membrane and release their contents into the synaptic cleft. Once they are in the synaptic cleft, neurotransmitters interact with receptors on the postsynaptic membrane. They bind to these receptors and can cause an action to occur in the postsynaptic cell as a result. This action may involve increasing the likelihood that the postsynaptic cell will become activated and fire an action potential, or decreasing it. Eventually, the neurotransmitter molecules must be cleared from the synaptic cleft. Some of them will simply drift away in a process called diffusion. In some cases, the neurotransmitter is taken back up into the presynaptic neuron in a process called reuptake. Once back inside the presynaptic neuron, the neurotransmitter can be recycled and reused. In other cases, enzymes break down the neurotransmitter within the synaptic cleft. Then the component parts of the neurotransmitter can be sent back into the presynaptic neuron to make more neurotransmitter.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this quick trip through the introduction to the nervous system. Next lesson will be on the reflex arch.